This is the third in our series of 3 Sunday mornings, looking at the prophet Micah in honour of our food bank, which is called Micah Liverpool. The Bible reading that Jackie has just read for us is a vision of peace and satisfaction, the kind of situation that people often long for, particularly when you're in the middle of a war. The bit about beating swords into ploughshares and spears into pruning hooks is perhaps one of the most famous passages in the Old Testament. It also occurs in the book of Isaiah. As these two prophets lived in the same country at the same time, they were both responding to the same situation. The difference is Isaiah lived in the city of Jerusalem. Micah was a country lad. So Micah's prophecy adds, after that he adds, "Neither shall they learn war any more, but they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid." So we are invited to imagine that we can all sit outside on a summer afternoon in our own garden next to our own vine and our own fig tree, and it may be worth mentioning both do grow in Liverpool. The grapes actually don't come from Liverpool. The figs do. They come from Dingle, and the leaves there are fig leaves. So if anybody here is called Adam or Eve, if you need something to wear, help yourself. I do wonder whether, when Micah said that, he'd forgotten about wasps. His point was that if you can produce your own, and it's enough, and nobody takes it off you, and you're content with what you've got, you can have peace. And everybody else can have peace. So, this is an image of peace without conflict. The image of everybody sitting under their own vines and fig trees occurs in one other place in the Old Testament, and it's very different. I've actually printed that text in your handout. The one at the front is the one that Jackie read. On page 2 at the bottom, well, at the top you'll see the map that it's referring to, and underneath the other text, which is very different. It's a description of the reign of King Solomon. Solomon lived before Micah, but the history of this account of King Solomon was written after Micah and is deliberately quoting Micah with his vines and fig trees. So that's the order. And when this author refers to vines and fig trees, we'll see that he's quoting Micah, but what he actually means is the exact opposite. And this may be worth reflecting on. So I'm just going to read this passage from the first book of Kings. About King Solomon. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon was sovereign over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines, even to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cors of choice flour and 60 cors of meal. Now, if you want to know what a core is, it's a unit of volume, but worked out in amounts of flour, it would be about as much as 2 of me. Right, that sort of quantity. So, that many cors is a lot. 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. This is his daily provision. Right, you get the message. A lot of wealth there. He was rich. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tipsah to Gaza, over all the kings west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides. Now, I want to just look at this. You can have a look at the map. Gaza is where it is now. Can you see the word Jerusalem on the map? It's about where the L is, on the coast there. Tipsah, nobody knows where it is, but it must have been up by the river Euphrates. Now, it's not very clear, this map. You can see the red bits and then the orange bits. And then between the orange bit and the blue river Euphrates, there's a sort of splodgy yellow, a bit darker than the rest. Can you see that? Right. Tipsah must have been at the top end of that, near the river Euphrates. And what the text is saying is that all that area was controlled by Solomon. However, if you see where the river Euphrates flows, you can see that describing his empire as all the region west of the Euphrates, bit of an exaggeration. So this text is really emphasizing how rich Solomon was. Then it goes on. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, all of them, here we are, under their vines and fig trees. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. I've marked Dan and Beersheba on this map. They're the black splodges, the little circles. Can you see? The top one is Dan, just east of Tyre, and the bottom one, just under Jerusalem, that's Beersheba. So what it's saying is, those peacefully under their vines and fig trees were that bit between Dan and Beersheba, the core state of Israel, not the whole empire. Given all those chariots and horsemen, the message is pretty clear. We're talking about peace with your vines and fig trees for Israel, by means of taking peace away from other people. Otherwise, why would you want all those chariots and horsemen? So now I'm going to refer to the Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann, who makes an interesting comparison of these texts. He says there were two economic systems in the ancient world. They didn't have economic theory, they just did what they did. In one of the economic systems, some people enjoyed surplus wealth at the expense of others. In the other, everybody produced and consumed their own wealth. This is the contrast we've been looking at over the last these 3 weeks. Brueggemann explains it so well, I'm going to quote him at some length now, if you forgive me. What he writes is, the poet, that is Micah, sees that there will be no personal well-being, i.e. unterrified, until there is an end to the public policy of war. The mad pursuit of security by war, the mad pursuit of energy for weapons, the reliance upon imperial administration of resources, all that must be dismantled in order for the personal dream to come true. Obviously, there can be no such personal well-being as long as there is war and threat of war. But what denies that personal hope is not simply hostility and the threat of hostility. Rather, the main threat to vines and fig trees is the economics that sustain and require war. What usurps vines and fig trees is not just invading armies, but the tax structure and the profit system, which are both cause and effect of military dangers. The poet envisions not simply a cessation of war, but the dismantling of the war apparatus. This may be an idyllic vision, but it contains political realism at its centre. The oracle offers not only a grand dream, but a realistic hint of what is required. The arms serve primarily either to usurp what belongs to others or to guarantee an arrangement already inequitable. The arms cannot be given up without abandoning swollen appetites as well. Right, that's the end of that quotation. To put it another way, if you and I are to live in peace, enjoying our own vines and fig trees, there are two ways to make it happen. Solomon's system is to use force to benefit ourselves at the expense of other people who will not be allowed to enjoy their own vines and fig trees. Micah's system is to limit our expectations so that our own peace and security is consistent with everyone else's peace and security. Brueggemann's an American. Commenting on the situation there, he says, the people with the most intimate dreams of personal vines and fig trees are the ones who make the demand, get the government off our backs. Yet these are also the people who hold most passionately to a war system to create an umbrella of security. The point is that it's a contradiction. An elaborate system of military defense can only exist by confiscating the very thing it claims to protect. Now, before I finish, one more point that Brueggemann also makes. And I'm going to refer to the beginning of the passage that Jackie read to us. And it's on the first page of your handout. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. To us, this may sound like a victory cry, a way of saying, we are going to win. Everybody is going to accept Jerusalem as the capital of the world. We are the winners. Micah's point will have been the exact opposite. It's difficult for us to see it when we read the text, but this is the point. He was taking part in a debate. Was the God of Israel a God of war, like the national gods of all the other nations, which is the way Solomon approached it? A God who wanted Israel to be successful at the expense of other nations, or was the God of Israel different? A God of peace for Israel by means of peace for other nations as well. If, as Micah believed, Israel's God was a God of peace, then the way to get it was to dethrone all the war-making gods of the other nations. Now, I'm going to stop there and invite, we've got 10 minutes, we can explore that. I'm going to invite you to move your chairs around and talk to each other. I've suggested some questions you might like to explore. What are the gods of Britain today that need to be dethroned? How would you feel about having a patch of land where you grow your own food, don't pay any taxes, and don't benefit from anybody else's taxes? And thirdly, could we be content with a society of equals, or are we too competitive? But talk about whatever you want. That's just my suggestion.